A friend of his said to me, he's definitely been thinking a lot about how things will evolve over time. When the moment comes, he'll want to do it his way, genuinely, not just following a script. He's not afraid to dig into the details, ask the tough questions, and figure out what actually works today. He wants to make sure the whole thing has even more, here it comes, impact and remains
How did I know that was coming?
relevant. Welcome to the Royals with Roya and Kate.
That's me, Kate Mancy, Royal Editor of The Times.
And me, Roya Nikar, Royal Editor of The Sunday Times.
Today, the King welcomes the President in September. Charles meets Donald. It's official. But who is deciding what when it comes to protocol and pomp?
And a deep dive on what the reign of Prince William might look like when he becomes king, from what he'll change about the monarchy to a very different style of coronation, with maybe a bit less pomp and perhaps some influence from medieval times. And who's going to be promoted under the reign of King William V?
No pomp at all?
Well, maybe just a little bit.
Now, turning to the King, the President and the Prime Minister. It seems that the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has decided to bring forward Donald Trump's state visit to September. This is against, we understand, the King's wishes to take a bit more of a leisurely approach to the state visit. This is the unprecedented state visit for the second time for Donald Trump.
Yep, we know there's a September state visit at Windsor Castle, which is now being planned. But what's actually going on behind the scenes, Kate? Because interesting piece in the Times this week that you did, which implied a little bit of argy-bargy and a little bit of, had an interesting headline, suggesting Keir Starmer had gone against the wishes of the King.
Yes.
In the choreography.
We understand that the King, we also saw, didn't we, that letter that he presented in the Oval Office, which suggested it might be helpful for Donald Trump to come and visit him privately first to thrash out the finer details of the full state visit, which is,
would
of course,
happen a bit later.
Unprecedented, which would happen later. So the idea perhaps that he would come in September, meet him at Balmoral, there would be a discussion and the state visit would be subsequent to that. Now, amid the trade war that's been going on with Donald Trump and tariffs with other countries, Sir Keir Starmer has been very, very keen to bring that forwards as quickly as possible to roll out the red carpet for Donald Trump while all these negotiations about trade are continuing behind the scenes. Now, we understand that hasn't been the ideal suggestion from the palace, that the palace are in a difficult spot because obviously the King always acts on the advice of his governments, plural. And meanwhile, there's a big trade war going on with Canada and the US, with Donald Trump continually saying that it should be the 51st state, the country north of the border, of which the King, of course, is king of that country as well. So this is all going on behind the scenes. Has the King been overruled? Well, the palace is saying he can't be overruled because he's always overruled.
Yeah.
You know, it's always on the advice of the government. But ultimately, it's not ideal. This has been going on for months now. And last week, we understand the Manu Regia.
What's the Manu Regia,
The Manu
Kate?
Regia. I'm glad you asked that, Roya.
People who don't know what the Manu Regia is, what's the Manu Regia?
Come from our Latin, as you all remember your Latin from school.
Vaguely.
The hand of the King, essentially on royal command. And this is the official document that kickstarts that state visit. You might remember that
Do you reckon Donald's framed it?
It was described to me as a keepsake, and it's handed over by officials, UK officials in the UK embassy in Washington, and I believe they dress up very nicely.
I bet he says it's the greatest Manu Regia there's ever been.
It'll be the most beautiful one that's ever been. It's a gold crest on it. It's signed by the hand of the King, and then hand delivered to the White House. And this means that the pomp and pageantry of that visit in September has already started, because this is the kind of the starting gun.
It's not just a paperless post save the date, is it?
It's not a kind of an email, RSVP. it's the full
View the
thing.
card.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit more formal.
And it means essentially it kickstarts the whole thing.
What do we think is really going on here? I mean, the idea is that, the King wanted to maybe see if he could kind of push the state visit into the long grass. I think that was never going to happen. I think Donald was always going to come.
Yeah, not long grass, I think, which suggests that, the never, never.
Yeah.
But we're always told, they get on well, they've known each other for a long time. Of course, they don't see eye to eye on green issues. We know that's obvious.
Yeah.
And they won't see eye to eye on Canada either. But, they do have a good working relationship.
Well, it really is. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole issue of Donald Trump coming here and any sort of, push and pull behind the scenes really comes down to how much say the king, members of the royal family have over who they invite and how they invite them, which at the end of the day is very little, because state visits, incoming and outgoing, are all about who the government wants to butter up, who we feel we owe. We've got a state visit, in a few weeks' time with France incoming. We owe the French because they've been great European allies, but also the king and queen went to France a couple of years ago for a state visit. So Macron is due one. And it's also effectively
about a long time
about
since the French have had one as well.
Trade and bilateral relations. And we have got this trade deal with the US. It's been, absolutely trumpeted that we are the first, big nation to get a trade deal under the new, tenure there. And really, it's about sucking up to Donald Trump, isn't it?
It's got to be about relations. It's got to be about maintaining that kind of what we've always been
special
relationship. Having said that, they've hosted very difficult guests in the past. We'll remember that when Xi Jinping came over, the Queen let slip afterwards that some of the Chinese officials had been very rude. She was overheard at a garden party saying that. So it hasn't always been kind of easy. We've talked about it before, about that first Trump visit and the scorch marks from his helicopter on the lawns of Buckingham Palace. This time he's going to have a different venue, of course, because Buckingham Palace is the big resurfacing work that's still carrying on there.
Will he chopper in and out of the castle?
Chopper in and out of the castle, I'm sure he will. I think you're right. It's how much power does the king have? How much power does the palace have? And it was made quite clear that to government that this puts the king in a very difficult spot.
I think there are of course small things that the king can shape in terms of the tone of the visit, how he receives Donald Trump, the formalities at the castle, where they dine at the castle, what that state banquet looks like. There are of course things that Charles can put his stamp on, and of course his speech, the state banquet speech, where he will make a speech, Donald Trump will reply. And, the king will, yes, it'll be written by the government, but the king will put a lot of his own input into that speech. There's no doubt about it.
And we'll be able to see from that, I think, how many personal flourishes he wants to include. And how far he's prepared to go on a personal level to make him feel welcome. Interestingly, that letter that was handed over in the Oval Office, now that was very unhelpful to the palace, that it was opened in public and waved in front of the cameras. It's also interesting.
The one about asking for a private visit first.
Yeah, saying come first for a private visit. There would have been a handshake photograph as part of that private visit. Now, my understanding is that Donald Trump didn't want that first initial handshake, quite informal at Balmoral in their civvies, to overshadow the all bells and whistles, as it's been described to me, the fest as it was described by Donald Trump, later event, the full state visit. So that was playing on his mind too. So this is something that Donald Trump has pushed for as well. Keir Starmer has offered it and the king has had to go along with it. I think it'll be fine in the end. And obviously he signed that document that means that it's happening.
Well,
it's coming.
It's going to make for a lot of fun coverage in September. It's not that far away.
Lots to write about.
Watch this space.
And President Trump is everywhere this week, dropping F-bombs and everything like that, but also on another kind of royal matter as well. Earlier this week, the Prince of Wales was attending London Climate Week.
Yes.
He was there to say that saving the planet is a team game. But at Bloomberg headquarters, somebody else was the subject of conversation.
Someone was, yes. Well, it was an event that was all about his Earthshot Prize, which is going to be in Brazil later this year. Looking forward to that trip. It's going to be a good bit of travel. We had Michael Bloomberg there, didn't we? Big philanthropist now, of course. He is the co-founder of Bloomberg, 3-term former mayor of New York, and he's been a big donor to the Earthshot Prize and a big supporter of it. And he said, while William was still there and part of the session, that Donald Trump has not made things better, quote, and that America are not doing their fair share in the environmental space since Donald Trump came to power again.
He said that America had not been pulling its weight lately. And then the mayor of Rio de Janeiro seemed to double down on that, Edward Pais. He said that, I'm not here to talk about politics, but having said that, Donald Trump is very lucky that he's had very good local city mayors. Otherwise, the US would be in a lot of trouble right now, he said. And he named Donald Trump, and there's William there in the front row.
Keeping very quiet.
keeping extremely quiet.
It's a tricky one for him, isn't it?
And then standing up and saying, look, it's a team game, trying to bring it all together. It is very difficult.
It's tricky because
he's about to go to Rio.
Yeah.
He's going to have this relationship with the mayor of Rio.
He's definitely going to be meeting Donald Trump again when he comes for the state visit in September. And we know that the Donald is extremely fond of William. You know, he's a
very handsome man, according to Donald Trump.
Made sure at Donald's request, he was the first UK representative he met after he was, re-elected at the Notre Dame Cathedral ceremony. You know, we saw that handshake there. Then we saw the meeting at the UK ambassador's residence in France. And we had Donald literally going, he's a really good looking guy. You know, he's doing a fantastic job. I mean, he couldn't have shouted with more praise in that 45-minute meeting. And as someone said to me last week, someone who knows William very well, joked to me and said, William only has to smile at Donald Trump and we get a cut in tariffs. I mean, it was half joking, but half not. That's a very important relationship.
Yeah, and he knows that to roll out the red carpet from the royals is the thing that no other country can offer.
So whatever William thinks about Donald Trump privately, we know William is as keen an environmental campaigner as his father is. And we know that Donald Trump is a climate skeptic. But whatever he thinks about him personally, he's going to play that role. And as someone said to me last week, you know, he's almost encouraging it. He's playing along with it. He's letting Donald Trump, have these conversations with him and almost fawn over him. Someone said, who does that remind you of? Reminds you of the late Queen, who had a nose for the strategic, who knew how to be and behave around global leaders, regardless of what anyone thought of them. It's interesting.
It is interesting. Well, Charles too has played a pretty good role in this.
Absolutely.
I have to say,
absolutely,
he came out as this sort of meddling Prince of Wales, and he had a reputation for trying to meddle in politics, sending spider memos and things like that. I think now there is a huge anxiety at the palace that this visit goes well. That there can't be seen to be any criticism about Donald Trump from the king.
There won't be.
Or they say, well, there's no discord. There's no discord.
There'll be lots of warm words
about the visit. Very much looking forward to hosting Donald Trump and the First Lady in September. So,
well, there's no doubt that Donald is going to get as much pomp and pageantry as he wants. But before that, Kate, it's been a very celebby week at the palace, hasn't it?
We can't move for A-listers at the palace this week.
You cannot move for Clooney's and Tracy Amons.
Tripping over them.
Dames, Joanna Lumley. They've been all over the place.
Beverly Hills has moved to...
Who have you spotted?
Buckingham Palace. Yes, you're right. Well, we have the George and Amal Clooney.
A-list.
So they
do a lot with the King's Trust, don't they?
They do. That's going to turn 50 next year. So there was a big kind of hurrah for the King's Trust International at the palace. Who else have we seen? Joanna Lumley, Joseph Fiennes.
Tracy Amon. She was at a lovely reception, which was celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Royal Drawing School. In her Crocs, there must be something about artisan Crocs, because David Hockney, when he met the King, came in his yellow Crocs.
Yellow Crocs.
And there was Tracy Amon at the palace in her Crocs. Artist Crocs busking.
Yeah. And Tracy, they seem to have a good chat. And Tracy Emin obviously has had her own cancer battle as well, which she's talked about. And I think that's bonded them even more, and the love of art. Fern Cotton, Declan Donnelly.
Are we still in A-list category here, or are we?
Oh, poor Deck. Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, Sugar Babes. And we just heard before we came on that Kate Winslet is now officially an ambassador for the King's Foundation.
Joining Sir David Beckham.
She was there, of course, with Meryl Streep.
She was.
And Anna Titchmarsh.
It was just the other day, wasn't it?
Yeah, just the other day.
Star-studded, very celebby, all lining up to help the King. I wonder why.
Because it's a good cause. Yes. Tracy Emin has called him utterly exceptional and said he's the best monarch in recorded history.
Joseph Fiennes dubbed Charles the patron saint of second chances, didn't he? Because he was praising his commitment to young people and all the second chances he's given to disadvantaged young people that the Trust has helped.
Yeah, he has. And Charlotte Tilbury, the makeup guru, called the King a global visionary for his work when it comes to climate change.
So lots of famous people.
It's very lovely.
Very nice. It's very lovely.
Like there's air kisses everywhere. And just before we go to a break, another update on a story that we've both been following for some time.
Yes.
And I think we called it and said this was the best one.
We did.
Lord Foster has been named as the person who's going to go ahead and design the lasting national memorial to the late Queen. Now, there were 5 shortlisters 5 shortlisted design teams. And Lord Foster's from Foster and Partners has won it. And his is going to head. There's a translucent bridge that's going to be across the pond at St James's Park.
Yep.
There are going to be figurative representations of the late Queen. We would call them statues, but the government doesn't do that.
There's a statue of the Queen with Prince Philip.
And there's another statue of the Queen on horseback looking out to the Mall.
It's the best.
And that is the best. Now, that would oversee any ceremonial procession that goes down the Mall. So she's going to have a kind of best view.
Will remind us as well of her on horseback for all those years. Up the Mall, trooping the colour. Because she was such an amazing equestrian. Do you know what it reminded me of? That when we saw the first designs, I think I mentioned this to you in Canada when we were on a very hilarious bus trip, you and I. Remember that? There's an incredible statue in Ottawa of the Queen on horseback, very near the Parliament building. And and I'm not saying Lord Foster has nicked the idea, but it's very similar to his design. And
it's not that different.
It's a fantastic design. And I just felt that Lord Foster's design of that statue of her on horseback, it just feels very majestic.
Yeah. Well, the National Committee who are responsible for this, so there's going to be a pot of money up to 46 million excluding that coming from the government. They're also saying that a sculptor will be selected later in the year. And it may not be that sculpture, that statue ends up with her being on horseback. But I think everything we've heard from Lord Foster this week, I think it will.
Anyway, we're delighted with that choice.
And we'll see the final design unveiled next year. And that's the design, that's the paper drawings. And then the actual thing will then start to come into fruition, be built after that. So little way off, but all good.
I'm looking forward to that statue.
Yeah. So Roya, one of the ways we refer to the Prince of Wales, you're writing those pieces, there's so many words. You go in as Prince of Wales, you might drop down to Prince William.
Yep.
And you might have to find other ways to describe him. And it's always heir to the throne, future king. What?
1 point Willie.
1 point Willie. That's Mike Tyndall's fault.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another podcast. Because one day, of course, we know he will be king. We can expect that to be the case anyway. And without a doubt, it's a role that's going to be the biggest role of his life and one for which he'll spend all his life up until that point training. We've learned a bit more about what he will do when he becomes king. Tell us about the piece that you wrote.
Well, he's been thinking rather a lot over the past year. So I wrote a big piece last weekend, close to 4,000 words, to mark what shouldn't really...
that long?
It was.
Gosh.
3,800 words. I started off thinking, I'll just do 2.5. And then it just kept going. Rang the editor and said, Ben, it's close to 4,000 words than 2. And he was like, fine. And anyway, I sort of found out that William's been doing a lot of thinking. And 43 shouldn't normally be a milestone. Of course, he turned 43 last Saturday. There's lovely pictures of him with his dog and the puppies. But actually, when you think about the last year, he's been navigating his father's cancer diagnosis, his wife's cancer diagnosis. He's described it as the most hardest year of my life. He's described it as brutal, but it's really been the most formative year of his life in terms of thinking about his future. And as someone very close to him said to me, when all of that is going on, there is an inner sense of reappraisal about what's important to him. So he's been giving it a lot of thought, and it feels like quite a lot's going to change.
What are the top things that are going to change, do you think?
Well, I think what came out of a lot of conversations I had around that were how quickly he's going to change things in a quite hands-on way at the palace, for starters, just in terms of the running of the operation. So a friend of his said to me, he's definitely been thinking a lot about how things will evolve over time. When the moment comes, he'll want to do it his way, genuinely, not just following a script. He's not afraid to dig into the details, ask the tough questions, and figure out what actually works today. He wants to make sure the whole thing has even more, here it comes, impact and remains...
How did I know that was coming?
...relevant. His priority will be to look under the hood and see if the engine is running in a way that delivers impact and is value for money.
Presumably he has a little insight into that. That's interesting to think how much he is shared with him at this stage, which it should be quite a lot, but it sounds like perhaps that's not always been the case. I think what's interesting, I wrote a piece when I Am King in April, and that I was really surprised at how open people were to talk about what sort of king William would be, because
there's usually been such nervousness, hasn't there?
Yeah, there is normally quite a lot of nervousness. Having said that, when Charles was Prince of Wales, we were briefed about what sort of king he would want to be.
Yeah.
What struck me as an interesting change was this idea, and we mentioned at the top of the programme, about perhaps going back to a medieval coronation, stripping it down and, going... and this is interesting, isn't it? That when someone in the royal family wants to do something new, they try and borrow from the past in as much a way that they can say, oh, this is, I'm sticking with tradition. So it'd be a way of him putting his own slant on the coronation by stripping it down and making it simpler.
He definitely...
But actually going, aha, it's been done before.
Yeah. I thought, for me, one of the most interesting things was how much he's very keen to restructure the palace machine quickly. And that came out very clearly from conversations I had. And obviously he knows, he's got an eye on the figures. We do too, but he's got an eye on the figures.
Certainly will next week.
He's certainly got an eye on the structure of it. And I think he feels it's changed, the actual running and makeup of the royal household at Buckingham Palace has changed so little since Victorian times. And what was sort of said to me was he will, I think, quite quickly be very hands-on in looking at that, restructuring it, making it a much leaner machine, checking that it's sort of working. And I think there'll be a very significant changing of the guard at the household when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, the king did a lot of that when he came in. There was a massive cull of staff. There were lots of people who were paid, not very great wages, to be honest. And a lot of people on the payroll, and Charles cut that down and made sure that the people who did stay had an uplift and that they were there really doing work, not just sort of lots and lots of, historic kind of flunky roles, essentially. He did trim it down.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how William takes that one step further.
I think
it'll
be less about people and more about the way...
Just robots, just put
the
robots
way
in.
The way it actually all runs. What was interesting to me as well was how... again, we talk about the fact that previously, there's always been a real sensitivity about not treading on the top job's toes. And it was the same with Charles when he was Prince of Wales. No one ever really talked about the future. It was all like, very hush hush. But what's interesting now is I think there are things that William kind of looks at and thinks that's working very well. The other day we heard him talking about things at the Duchy that he wants to change, but make sure he says, there are things that my father's done that I think are really good and I want to continue. But I think, it's interesting.
There's not much of that. We don't
know.
Hear much of that from William.
We don't.
To be fair,
we don't. There is an interesting look at, okay, well, we talked about before, who isn't being used? Sophie and Edward, and again, that is constantly emphasised now that William has got big plans for them, that they will do a lot more. And I asked the question, well, we've seen Zara and Mike, we've seen Peter Phillips, we've seen Beatrice and Eugenie support him at these garden parties for the last couple of years. And he's not going to put them on the payroll, but he probably will have them doing a lot more with him when he's king, which again will look very different because we've got the Duke of Kent, who's very elderly, I think 89. We've got the Gloucesters who are 80 and 79. Princess Anne will be 75 soon. William knows that Buckingham Palace balcony is going to look very different very soon.
And I think it'll be more like an Ascot scenario, that you have this, the wider family who aren't part of aren't on the payroll, but come out and are seen with the family. And you see that at Ascot and you see that at other events. At the moment, we just have on that balcony working members of the royal family, full-time working members. Well, in a few years' time, that's going to look quite thin. And you wonder whether those other members of the family will be brought in. Certainly, we've seen it at garden parties and things like that.
Well, Ascot's an interesting point because Royal Ascot, of course, we saw William there one day last week. Kate, in the end, pulled out very, very last minute. But, we saw the King and Queen there every single day. We will not see William at Royal Ascot every single day when he's king. And
more likely to see him at the Aston Villa football ground, I think, in his trainers.
I think you can certainly expect to see Zara, who's a very keen equestrian. She's been a director at Cheltenham races, for a while.
Hand it to her.
I think she will be much more hands-on in the running of Royal Ascot. And I think she and, possibly her mother Anne will be much more hands-on in the running of the Royal Stud at Sandringham. These are things that will change quite significantly. Because as someone said to me, the top hat and tails thing has never been William's thing at Royal Ascot. He's never felt comfortable doing it, and he has said so.
He even looked uncomfortable when he turned up, didn't he? And
so
without his wife, he was sort of fiddling with his
Those are big things
jacket.
I think he'll delegate, which is interesting.
And the looking under the hood will be something that we will get to have a little go at next week, because it's the royal correspondent's favourite day of the year. It's the money day. So there's been a lot of debate about the sovereign grant and how the royal household is funded, how that money is spent. And on Monday, we will go to the palace for a briefing to find out just the answers to that.
Yeah,
hopefully.
we get the headline figures, don't we?
And also William's Duchy of Cornwall and whatever they're prepared to share in a subsequent briefing. So that will be really interesting to come back and talk about that.
Yeah, because money was, again, another thing that I kept picking up on when I was researching this piece. And the phrase that was being used with William's very mindful of how much the monarchy costs. And I thought to myself, well, is he looking to get that sovereign grant headline figure down? And if so, how do you do that? Well, travel could be an interesting thing. We know that William doesn't favour these long overseas tours that cost an awful lot of money. We've already been told he's going to change. He's already changing that. He's already going for like 1 or 2 days here or there. We've been talking a lot about the future and looking into the crystal ball of King William V as to what he might change in the future. But if you look closely, and actually I hadn't clocked this until someone mentioned it to me, there are things he's doing now that are changing, which give you an insight into how things are starting to look different already. And quite recently, someone said to me, very close to the royal family, said, if you notice, you'll notice that you don't really see Lord Lieutenants on many of William's jobs. Now, Lord Lieutenants, for our listeners, might not know what they do, but they're normally people who do lots of great work in each county, who welcome senior members of the royal family to each event. And William sort of has decided he doesn't feel he needs that extra layer of formality. And so you don't see them very often. You see them occasionally in the home sort of nations. You see them in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland.
Yeah.
And someone said to me, it really pisses off some of the Lord Lieutenants that William doesn't feel he needs them in every engagement, but that just is the way it is. And when I spoke to someone close to William, they were like, well, he really values their work, but yeah, he doesn't think he needs them there at everything. It's too formal.
Well, I think things will change, and I've said it before. I think that everybody was so worried about the late Queen passing because it's all so many people had ever known and all people could remember. But the big change will be the next reign. And well, that's not to say that we have any other, secret briefings or anything like that about what, Charles's condition. That the guidance remains the same, that he's getting on with work and continues his cancer treatment. As always, the palace prepares for the coronation, the next reign, the transition, as they call it.
It was underway a long time last time around, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There've been lots of planning for years.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And William's already seems to be planning. And it's interesting, we were talking about politics at the start of the programme, that William's been having private meetings with Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister responsible for housing. And shortly after a recent meeting they had at Windsor Castle, she announced a new scheme to stop rough sleeping being illegal. And that's obviously been one of William's big projects, the Homewards project.
Yes.
To tackle homelessness. So he's already making those connections. We've talked about Trump. He's already setting the ground so that should the worst happen, probably in his mind as well as the king's mind, that he accedes the throne earlier than he had hoped and than anyone would wish, that he's in a position that the public acknowledge that he's at a position and at a level to handle that job.
So one of the things that we know, I think, is going to look really quite different when transition happens and reign change comes is William's coronation. So you and I were at the last coronation.
Yeah.
And it was definitely, thankfully, shorter than Queen Elizabeth's in 1953. That was more than 3 hours. King managed to shave off a good hour off that. But it was majestic. It was all the pomp, all the pageantry, all the bells and whistles.
It was also very personal to Charles, wasn't it? Even from the invitation,
yes,
with the foliage and the greenery.
It wasn't simple.
King.
It was.
And his own music that he had commissioned.
Yes, the music was beautiful.
It's very much his stamp on it. And I think it's an important marker for how he wanted his reign to be seen and how he wanted to go forward from that moment.
I think
so. What William does with that in that space will be really interesting.
I think what you've just said is really interesting. I think I remember literally writing that as the first line in my coverage was, if a coronation represents what a reign is going to look like, it was so Charles, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Everything. It was very personal. The message that William is quite keen to get out, and actually I was astonished he was keen to get it out within a week of his father's coronation in 2023, was how different his will be. And people were saying to me, he's been thinking about it.
I wouldn't do it like that.
Yeah. I'm not going to do that bit. He's been thinking about it. And
but I mean, is that very helpful? Is it helpful for, to have that sort of voice from the sidelines so early on in a reign, do you think?
Well, I thought it was interesting that he wanted that out there. He clearly,
well, that's what I mean.
He clearly saw that service and thought, okay, that's what people think of the monarchy now. I want people to know that mine's going to look quite different. The words were more modern, more relevant. And I dug down a little bit more into that for this piece at the weekend. And, I think, put it this way, it's not going to be a no-frills 2-star hotel kind of gig, is it? It's still going to feel very grand.
Thank goodness for that.
There will still be crowns, despite the fact
he is quite traditional. He is quite traditional.
He is. Someone very close to him said, if you look at the medieval coronations, look how simple they were, look how pared back they were. Get back to that. Get back to the core of the simple stuff. Keep it diverse. Keep it pared back. And the same person said to me,
how diverse they were in medieval times.
Who knows William very well, said, I don't think he should wear the imperial state crown. I think it looks like something out of Walt Disney. And I sort of mooted this to William's camp and got an interesting response, which is that he hasn't made that decision yet as to which crown he's going to wear. But he is mindful of tradition, and he feels a very strong sentimental link to the imperial state crown.
I think it'd be ridiculous if
because his father wore it and his grandmother wore it.
If he decided not to, I think that would be a huge story. Because, not just that. Yeah, that goes back so far. There's a kind of history of that,
and he's very mindful of that, regardless of how much he wants to modernise. Anyway, it's going to look very different. Will we be there, Kate?
Goodness, who knows, Roya? Crystal ball time. But we will be here next week, hopefully.
There'll be a lot of numbers.
Talking about the cash.
There'll be a lot of numbers.
Talking about the Luca, where it's all been spent. And, will William reveal if he's paid tax, or how much tax he's paid? Which was the question asked, That was unanswered. Unanswered. The answer was he's paid tax at the rate he should have paid tax at, but they didn't give us the figure. So we shall see this time.
Watch this space. Who are the high rollers?
Who are the high rollers? Who are the high flyers?
Has the king turned the temperature down on the pool even further?
But for now, that's it for this episode.
We'll be back next week. See you then, Kate.
See you then.